2022 saw more viral moments from frequent sparring partners New York Democrat Representative Jerry Nadler and Ohio Republican Representative Jim Jordan. Both are on the House Judiciary Committee, where Nadler serves as chairman and Jordan is ranking member. Within the past year, they have called each other out directly on the House floor. Nadler accused Jordan of wanting to defund the police during remarks on the House floor in September. The Ohio Republican, on the other hand, has accused Nadler of, quote, giving cover to Antifa during remarks in the spring. Here's more of their testy moments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
The chairman just said that the Democrats have always been, I think the direct quote was equitable funding for law enforcement. That's interesting because just 2 years ago, here's what the chairman said, June of 2020. There should be substantial cuts to police budgets. I don't know how you can always be for something and then just 2 years ago say, so I don't know how you can say you've always been for something and 2 years ago you said that you weren't, but that just seems what Democrats are up to today. Let's call this package of bills before us today exactly what it is. It's an election year ploy from Democrats to try to look like they care about funding law enforcement. In the wake of radical left-wing efforts to defund the police, it's no surprise that violent crime is on the rise in America. Every major urban area has seen a huge uptick in violent crime. It should also be no surprise that Democrats are now trying to run and hide from their radical ideas and dangerous rhetoric. For more than 2 years, we've seen violent crime surge all across the country, particularly in Democrat-run cities, while many of those same Democrats not only advocated for defunding police departments, but they did it. They cut them. Now the Democrats want to use federal tax dollars to paper over the problems they created in their local Democrat-run cities. But these bills do nothing to solve the underlying problem. They simply create more grant programs within the bureaucracy of the federal government. Under current law, there are already grants available to law enforcement to hire personnel. In fact, last year the Justice Department awarded more than $139 million in grant dollars through the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services. That money provided funds to 183 law enforcement agencies and allowed them to hire more than 1,000 additional officers. We don't need more federal grants, so Democrat-run cities can then divert taxpayer money to fund their woke agenda. What we need is prosecutors who are willing to prosecute crimes and jurisdictions with laws that actually keep violent criminals in prison. Nothing in these bills prevent jurisdictions that choose to defund their police from receiving these grant funds. In fact, when Judiciary Republicans offered an amendment to preclude jurisdictions that defunded their police from receiving grant funds, the Democrats rejected it, and they rejected it unanimously. Faced with an election just over a month away, House Democrats now want to pretend they actually support law enforcement. The timing of this bill should tell you all you need to know about where Democrat priorities are. Democrats who are in full control of this body have had 2 years to show their support for law enforcement. Only now, when faced with an impending election, are Democrats beginning to feign support for our men and women in the blue. Democrats could have shown their support for law enforcement. Instead, Democrats passed bills to infringe on Americans' Second Amendment rights, legalize marijuana, further empower the Biden Justice Department to spy on concerned parents. These bills are just another admission by Democrats that the defund the police movement is wrong and irresponsible. Perhaps the Democrats weren't in a cleanup mode after their irresponsible embrace of defund the police rhetoric. The Judiciary Committee could have had an opportunity to consider and improve most of these bills before they came to the floor. But we didn't. And instead, Democrats are rushing to consider these bills to give themselves some pretense that they support funding the police. No one's fooled. Americans know where Democrats really stand. Americans aren't buying the Democrats' revisionist history. They've seen years of Democrats embracing and supporting the radical defund the police movement. Americans know that the Democrats are the party of soaring crime and defunding the police. I urge opposition and reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we don't give cover to anything. White nationalism is wrong. We've always said so. Everyone knows that. But I tell you who does give cover when the chairman of the Judiciary Committee says that Antifa is a myth. That is giving cover. And that is a statement made by the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee after we had testimony from FBI Director Wray talking about the dangers of Antifa, after the Attorney General Barr told us that Antifa was involved in instigating and participating in violent activity. Talk about giving cover. Give me a break. I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman, my friend and colleague from the state of Florida, Mr. Gates.
Mr. Speaker, it is no surprise that assault weapons are the weapon of choice for mass shooters and those who target law enforcement. They are designed for ruthless efficiency, killing the most people in the shortest amount of time. And the gentleman from Ohio was right. I did say in the committee, spare us the BS. I meant the Republican BS about the Constitution, about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is designed not to allow people to fight the government. Do we want to take up arms against American troops? Is that what they say? That is what they say. We saw what that did with the insurrection we had recently, and that was a mild case. No, the assault weapons, the Second Amendment is designed to allow for a well-regulated militia, which is to say in our day, the National Guard. The assault weapons ban would take the weapons of war off our streets and save countless lives. And that is why it is supported by all associations of police, by the American Federation of Teachers, the American College of Physicians, the American Public Health Association, the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, the Major Cities Police Chiefs Association. They know what they're doing. The assault weapons ban would take these weapons of war off our streets. It would prevent more of the Uvaldes, more of the Parklands, more of the Tree of Life synagogues. I urge all members to support this important legislation, and I yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this bill would bolster law enforcement across the country and improve public safety. And I think it's telling that people like Mr. Rutherford on the Republican side of the aisle helped craft this bill with people like Mr. Gottheimer on this side of the aisle. On the other hand, there are obviously a lot of Republicans like Mr. Jordan who want to defund the police, or at least defund small-town America police, by opposing this bill. So I urge all members to support small-town America, to support policing in small-town America by supporting this bill. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 1377, the previous question is ordered on the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think in your opening statement you used the term, you used the phrase Republicans opposed it, I think 7 times if I counted accurately. The reason we opposed it is because all those pieces of legislation were a direct violation of the Second Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Plain and simple. It doesn't say the right to keep and bear muskets shall not be infringed. It doesn't say shall not be infringed unless Democrats say this weapon looks so scary we have to get rid of it. It doesn't say that at all. It says shall not be infringed. We said this in the last markup on legislation where the Democrats were trying to infringe on Americans, law-abiding American Second Amendment liberties. We said the Democrats' beef is with the Second Amendment. If you want to change the Second, you want to get rid of the Second Amendment, go try a constitutional amendment. See how far you get with that. But instead, no, you come with these pieces of legislation. If this legislation becomes law, millions of firearms that Americans legally own today will be illegal. Under this bill, if you give one of those legally owned firearms to a family member or a friend or a neighbor, you could end up in federal prison for 5 years if you don't go through an FFL for a background check prior to letting your grandson use your firearm. Think about that. Millions of guns that fit the description of those outlined in this bill are in the homes of law-abiding Americans as we speak right now. This bill would send these lawful firearm owners to prison if they try to give a neighbor or sell them to a friend. Not only would this legislation strip Americans of their rights, but it would do nothing to make our communities safer. We know that because Democrats tried it before. They tried it with the, quote, assault weapons ban in 1994, and guess what? That ban was found to be ineffective in reducing violent crime. A congressionally mandated study concluded that the banned guns were never used in more than a modest fraction of all gun murders, before the 1994 ban, and that the law's 10-round limit on new magazines was not a factor in multiple victim or multiple wound crimes. The bill before us today repeats the same assault weapon ban and limits new magazines to 15 rounds. Democrats know this legislation will not reduce violent crime or reduce the likelihood of mass shootings, but they are obsessed with attacking law-abiding Americans' Second Amendment liberties. For over 30 years, the Democrats have been running a propaganda campaign to make people believe that, quote, assault weapons are a specific class of firearms that no one needs to own. In reality, assault weapons is a message-tested phrase made up by the political class to advance its anti-gun agenda. In 1998, gun control advocates at the Violence Policy Center made up the term assault weapon to stoke fear and exploit public confusion about commonly owned rifles. These advocates stated that this confusion can only increase the chance of public support for restrictions on these weapons. Just last week, in a moment of candor, the Associated Press cautioned avoiding terms like assault weapon and assault rifle because they are highly politicized and convey little meaning about the actual functions of the weapon. Despite what gun control advocates claim, semi-automatic assault weapons are not designed to spray fire. They are not designed to be fired from the hip. They are not high-powered. They are not equipped with grenade launchers and rocket launchers, as some have said. The notion that adding certain accessories to an otherwise lawful rifle can somehow turn that rifle into an assault weapon is illogical and wrong. Proponents of gun control label standard capacity magazines sold with commonly owned firearms as, quote, high capacity or large capacity magazines. The overwhelming majority of magazines sold with rifles and handguns have the capacity to accommodate between 15 and 30 rounds of ammunition. Both semi-automatic assault weapons and large-capacity ammunition feeding devices have been used for self-defense purposes. This legislation will not make our communities safer. It will, in fact, make them more dangerous. In 2019, there were 386 self-defense killings that were determined to be, quote, justifiable homicides by investigators and prosecutors. In 2013, a study ordered by the CDC and carried out by the National Academies Institute of Medicine and National Research Council found that annual defensive uses of a firearm range numbered up to 3 million. This number has likely gone up since then as more states have passed laws allowing law-abiding citizens to carry a concealed firearm. And most importantly, the very types of firearms we are discussing here today have been used in numerous self-defense situations just this year. On July 7th, 2022, a Florida homeowner fired his AK-47 style rifle when individuals forcibly entered his home. After the homeowner opened fire, the individuals immediately fled. When asked if the homeowner would face charges, Escambia County Sheriff Chip Simmons said, absolutely not. The homeowner's protecting himself, and in Florida and in Escambia County, you can protect yourself. On April 8th, 2022, a man in Melbourne, Florida, sitting at his truck, in his truck outside a friend's house, was confronted by an angry acquaintance who opened fire on him. The man grabbed his own handgun and shot back. When the handgun jammed, the man retrieved his AR-15 from his backseat and started shooting back. The man maintained defensive fire until the assailant ran away. Police were able to arrest and charge the assailant. No one was injured. On April 7th, 2022, in Brownsboro, Texas, a homeowner armed with an AR-15 rifle confronted a suspect who broke into his home by smashing through glass of the front door. The homeowner held the suspect at gunpoint until the police arrived. Democrats get their way, law-abiding Americans would be prevented from using these weapons to defend themselves against violent intruders in their homes. Prevented from defending themselves, their family, their property because of this legislation. This legislation is dangerous. It doesn't square with the Constitution, with the Second Amendment in any way, and it has failed in the past. Because of all that, I urge my colleagues to vote against it. I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I find it amazing that the gentleman from Ohio would argue that we shouldn't give appropriations to the Department of Justice. Congress votes appropriations for every department. And if you think the Department of Justice is not being run properly, well, there's a presidential election coming up. That's the purpose of elections. And at the present time, the American people, 2 years ago, elected Joe Biden president and Kamala Harris vice president, and the president appointed the Secretary of Justice and the chairman of the FTC, both of whom I think are doing an excellent job, but it's a matter of debate which can be decided in the next presidential election. And to argue that we should starve agencies of the United States government so that they cannot do the job for which Congress passed statutes mandating them to do the job is absurd. And all that the increase in fees does is update, because the last increase of fees was I don't know how many years ago, and there's been inflation, and we need the enforcement against the large big tech companies because, as Mr. Jordan already acknowledged, they represent a threat. I think he thinks they represent a different threat from the one I think they represent, but everybody agrees they represent the threat, and their power must be properly supervised by proper enforcement of the antitrust laws. I reserve.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I would just point out, I didn't say that Congress shouldn't appropriate dollars to federal agencies. What I said is we shouldn't give more money to the DOJ in light of what we've seen them do, in light of what 14 whistleblowers have told us over the last several months, what they're up to. That's a completely different point. I'm all for looking at ways to cut certain agencies and reduce government and the power that they have, but I didn't say that. I just said we shouldn't be giving them more money, for goodness sake, in light of what they've been doing. I think that's a pretty reasonable position. Frankly, a position I think the vast majority of the country would have when they look at the actions they have seen from their Department of Justice and the tax money that supports that agency. Again, we reserve, Madam Chair.